We are going to start our afternoon session. We are going to start our afternoon session, and I would like to call all the members who are meant to be at the podium to please come forward so that we can redeem the time. Dr. Eva, you're our chair. I don't know where you are, but please. As Dr. Eva comes, please, members, whoever you're supposed to join the podium, please come forward. That is Professor Dipio, Dominique. I don't see her around though. We have Isaac.
Knowledge production at Makerere University. In this session this afternoon, we're going to have two papers. There would have been three papers, but one of our colleagues, Professor Dominic Dipio, lost a relative, so she's not going to be here. And therefore, we are going to be privileged then to be able to have a paper take 20 minutes of presentation, and then it will also get some time for discussion. So allow me to welcome Dr. Christine Mbabazi and Dr. Chris Tuhirirwe to give us the first paper that is entitled Legacy on Teaching, Research, and Publication in African Traditional Religion at Makerere University. You are welcome. You might, perhaps, if both of you are going to present, maybe you can decide who goes first and takes 10 minutes, and then the other one.
The chair for this session. Good afternoon, members. My name is Chris Tuhirirwe, and I'm a lecturer in the Department of Religion and Peace Studies here at Makerere. And I'll be co-presenting this paper with Dr. Christine Mbabazi over there. So I will present for some few minutes, and then I will call her in to conclude. So you are welcome, members. Now, in this paper that we are going to present, probably you have read its abstract in the abstract book, but we intend to present the legacy of Professor John Samuel Mbiti. Mbiti was serving in the Department of Religion and Religious Studies and Philosophy, as it was called at that time, at Makerere University during the period from 1964 up to 1974. As background to this paper, you need to note that in the book that was launched this week, we gave the history of the department as the theme was required at that time of the Department of Religious Studies. And when we presented that historiography of our department, certainly Mbiti had to be mentioned, and indeed we mentioned him. But then we thought that we had not given him enough attention, especially in regard to considering his legacy, which we found was so broad. And so we thought we should have a separate presentation detailing his legacy, especially in some aspects, as I will be telling you. So this is an ongoing research project, and like you have already heard, it's a joint presentation as it is. Now, this paper intends to document Mbiti's contribution and to underscore him as an outstanding celebrity in religious studies scholarship. The paper shall proceed from the premise that Mbiti's legacy at Makerere University is too broad actually to be considered in a single paper, given the space and time limitations. Therefore, we shall examine Mbiti in specific aspects of his legacy, but focusing on his contribution towards teaching. How did he teach? Research and publication in the area of African traditional religion, which we sometimes abbreviate as ATR, and how this has continued to influence scholarship in religious studies. There is no doubt at all that Mbiti influenced scholarship, especially in ATR, while at Makerere, and so the major objective of this paper will be to highlight and document this Mbiti's legacy in the African traditional religion scholarship. And when we examine this legacy, then we aim at documenting some of the narratives about Mbiti. Of course, we document his works, his biography and career, and then we reflect on some of the lessons that can be learned from his legacy, especially by us who are living in the post-Mbiti era in Makerere. We therefore envisage that this paper will contribute to the existing body of knowledge when we unpack Mbiti's legacy on teaching, research, and publication, and then the future scholars who come even after us will continue to reflect on this legacy. Now, in this paper, we address specifically 3 questions. First of all, we look at who is Mbiti in terms of his biography, his professional and academic career. We also look at his legacy and scholarly contribution at Makerere in terms of teaching, research, and publication, of course, particularly in African traditional religion. And we also look at what lessons can be drawn from this legacy in general and in the Department of Religious Studies in particular. As our methodology, we intend to make our key sources of information in this paper to include documentary analysis from various archival materials which we will be able to access. Most of these are in our university library here. Reports about what was happening in the university at that time, specific secondary sources, especially those books that were authored by Mbiti himself, and which are many, but also occasional research journals and other academic papers and articles that have been written by religious studies and other scholars at different moments in time, especially those articles and tributes that were given after the death of Mbiti, and which are many, including one from our keynote speaker this morning, which we were able to access online and which we were able to review. Now, besides, of course, we look at the authors. The authors shall interact with the various primary sources of information, including some of the existing contemporaries of Mbiti. Of course, staff in the department, alumni, and students in the Department of Religion and Peace Studies, as well as some other informants from outside the departments. And we believe that the voices from some of these people will be captured in our paper in the form of oral interviews. So to the first question, who is Mbiti, in terms of his biography, professional and academic career, we briefly talk about his early education. Probably even some of you in the audience may not be aware of who this man Mbiti was. Mbiti was born in 1931 in Kenya, where his strong Christian family saw to his Christian and Western formal education. Actually, he got Western and Christian education. He came from a very strong Christian family. But at the same time, he received another informal education. Especially, he got interested in the Akamba traditions. Akamba was his society. The stories and the art of storytelling in that society that was very fascinating to him. And this led him to publish many stories and poems and even novels concerning this Akamba society. After he attained his early education in Kenya, Mbiti continued with his education at the University College of Makerere in Uganda here in the early 1950s. Many of you know that a number of Kenyan scholars at that time were actually coming to Makerere, which was a constituent college of the University of London in the UK. And later Mbiti continued with his studies and attained other degree awards, including a Bachelor of Arts and a Bachelor of Theology by 1957. He taught on religion in Kenya and in England in the late 1950s before he attained a PhD in theology at Cambridge University in the United Kingdom in 1963. But Mbiti also was ordained as an Anglican priest in the Church of England following his graduation from Cambridge University. And because of this, he served as a parish priest in England for a while before he came back here to Makerere in 1964 This time, of course, not as a student, but as a teacher of theology and religion at that time, particularly in the area of traditional African religions from 1964 to 1974 when he left. Now, his times as an academic staff and leader at Makerere University were very fascinating. At the time when he came to the university and joined the Department of Religious Studies and Philosophy, as it was called at that time, the head of the department was Professor Noel King, who had just founded it a year before in 1963. It is mentioned that Professor King actually personally sourced Mbiti from Cambridge University when he had gone there for a conference to join the department at Makerere, from where his professional and academic career and scholarship was actually started, nurtured and developed and largely defined. So although Mbiti did a lot of works, especially even outside Makerere, and was born in Kenya, but actually his scholarship career was started here in Makerere. Now, when Mbiti joined the department, he introduced the new course units in African traditional religion on the teaching curriculum. They were not there before he came. And this brought scholarship of African traditional religions in the department. He also went ahead to teach and develop these new courses into fully-fledged courses in the department, where African traditional religion is still taught up to today. So everything was started by Mbiti when he joined. And after a few years as a lecturer, he replaced Noel King as the head of the department in 1968. Now, by the time when Mbiti became the head of the department, there was not much academic vibrancy as is there today, especially in the area of teaching, the area of research and publication, as it later came to be under his leadership as head. Now, Mbiti taught at Makerere until about 1974, when he was appointed as the director of the World Council of Churches in Geneva, Switzerland. And when he went there, he settled and worked there for the rest of his life until he died in October 2019. But all this professional biography and career mentioned, what exactly is Mbiti's legacy at Makerere in terms of teaching, research, and publication, particularly in African traditional religions? I will highlight very quickly 5 points, which will be a basis for our discussion. So how should we remember Mbiti at Makerere? And why should we remember Mbiti the time when he served? What is really very important about Mbiti that needs to be remembered about him? His legacy at Makerere. First of all, we look at his role as an academic staff and a leader in the Department of Religion and Peace Studies today. Mbiti was an academic staff and leader at the level of the head of department, and he ably steered the department during those formative years. Remember, it had just been formed in 1963, and he came in 1964. But together with his colleagues at that time, he was able to steer the department that Noel King had just recently established. So he leaves behind a very important legacy in that aspect. Secondly, his role in the introduction of the teaching of African traditional religion courses in the department. Mbiti introduced and developed the African traditional religion courses that we still teach in our department up to this day, and which have become part of our curriculum. And they have remained there, and we are still teaching them up to this day. So credit goes to him. Probably if he had not been there, today we would not be talking about African traditional religions in the department at Makerere. Mbiti also spearheaded intensive research and publication. Probably this is where we need actually to emphasize his legacy in the department, was in the area of research and publication in African traditional religion, and he leaves a very big challenge for us, the scholars who come after Mbiti. The genealogy of Mbiti's scholarship is much revealed in his research and publication in African traditional religions. According to an online article that we have been able to access by Enekwe Aboji, written in 2019 after his death, after the death of Mbiti, his article, he emphasizes that Mbiti actually published over 400 articles, reviews, and books on theology, religion, philosophy, and literature. And in all these, Africa remained the center and context of his academic scholarship. Some of his several publications, mostly covering the academic spectrum of African traditional religion, there are many, I will not enumerate all of them, but they include books like African Religions and Philosophy, written in 1969, Introduction to African Religion, 1975, The Concepts of God in Africa, and many others. When we in our paper, we write about all these in more details. You will find that majority of these publications by Mbiti continue to be cited by students and teachers of African traditional religion today. When I'm teaching in the department today, I use many of these books as my reference books. I refer them to my students, and they actually cite them and use them more and more in scholarship. There is therefore no doubt that Mbiti became a great theologian scholar, a Christian philosopher, and a prolific writer. Not only in religious studies, interestingly, but even he goes to the spectrum of literature. He wrote so many works, so many literary works that are still quoted and cited. Mbiti is generally considered to be the father of modern African theology, particularly in African traditional religion. So when we talk about the story of African religion, in much of Africa and in Uganda here, the name of Mbiti cannot be left out in that narrative. But fourthly, his promotion of scholarship in the department when he was head. He initiated traveling seminars. He initiated public academic debates and engagements. Some of these were not there before Mbiti came. He initiated programs of community outreach. His belief was that the university should be taken out into the society as academicians interact with the members of the public, workshops, and other forms of engagement. That was his method, his approach to academic life. He did not believe that the university should only be an ivory tower, but it should go out and as academicians interact and exchange with members of the public. But in addition to this, of course, he encouraged the academic exchanges, especially through visiting lecturers and all forms of academic interaction. The department became very vibrant at that time. Sometimes when I read about what was happening, I'm really personally challenged. Where did all this go? When we talk about it as a legacy, but why can't we have these things? Where did the visitors go after Mbiti, and how can we encourage this scholarship today? Finally, the great influence that Mbiti had was also on his contemporaries, students, future scholars, and teachers of African traditional religion. There are many of Mbiti, people like Professor Jesse Mugambi, who is a professor of philosophy and religious studies at the University of Nairobi in Kenya. People like Professor Byaruhanga Akiki, who is a professor emeritus of religious studies at Makerere. These were really mentored by Mbiti himself at Makerere here. People like Professor Aloysius Rugila, who is a professor of religious studies based in the United States of America, who even served as a dean in our Faculty of Arts at that time. All these were mentored. They sat at the feet of this great scholar and were able to be mentored at that time. And some of them are living testimonies of the greatness of Mbiti in ATR scholarship. So when we discuss the legacy of Mbiti, it's really broad. And we need to, as we discuss it, it needs to challenge us so that we can reflect on it, and we discuss it as especially the present scholars. What can we learn from Mbiti, and how can it influence our scholarship today? And at this moment, Chair, I don't know how many minutes I have taken, but let me now invite my co-author to come and lead us into this discussion and reflection on Mbiti and what lessons we can learn from his legacy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Tuhirirwe, for that biographic historicization of Mbiti. What Chris doesn't declare is that he's a real fan of Mbiti, maybe a grandson, because Chris picks up in the department, picks up from Biaruhanga Kiki. And so when we talk about the scholars of ATR in religious studies, we are thinking about Chris Tuhirirwe, Bernard Lurekera, who is not here, but they are the current two scholars taking forward the dream of Mbiti. I have some things that I have thought through that we're trying to make sure that as we develop and get this paper to grow, we need to acknowledge that at some point we will ask Chris to tell us whether he is going beyond Mbiti or he is stuck with Mbiti. What justice have you done to Mbiti in this particular reflection? What Chris just told us about the early beginnings of Mbiti, or his early life and education and professional growth, clearly shows that our backgrounds are very important in forming us. So when Mbiti writes about African traditional religions or Africa, when he's occupied with the whole issue of Christianity and how he wants to portray it, when he's occupied, you can see that his being born in a strong Christian family doesn't actually leave him. It forms him and informs some of his reflections on issues that are African and how they should be conceptualized in the area of religion. Mbiti's Christian background sticks with him even when he is convincing us about African traditional religion. There are still a few things he behaves himself to ensure that he somehow does not let go. Although what he's credited for is to insist on the African context, African identity, and that can be seen from his works. Mbiti seems to be grappling with what Western theology and what African theology should be like. Mbiti is emphasizing the place of African identity. He doesn't want the African voice, the Africanness of a scholar, of a believer, to completely go Western. You can see that he writes in, some of his writings are in Akamba. We can also see that he's occupied with the interaction of faith and culture. And for him, he thinks that the interaction in faith between the gospel and culture will produce a particular brand of Christianity. And that to him, any serious Christianity that is worth talking about should be an encounter of the gospel with the indigenous African culture. And in the end, in about in the 70s, we see the rise of African independent churches. And Mbiti's voice is clear in highlighting what an African should understand, for example, Christianity to be. So for him, a truly incarnated church is that which has practices, doctrines, symbols that are comprehensible by the African people. And so I'm not surprised to see that these days you hear in the city people who want to worship, have an evening worship session in Lusoga, in Rutoro, in Runyoro, exclusively in a particular language. So again, you're seeing that there is something that Mbiti alluded to that goes on even up to today. From what Chris tells us, we see a leader that is vibrant. We see a leader that is taking the university out into the community. Records from the department reveal that he would go to high schools, for example, Gayaza, and give lectures there, explain issues of contemporary concern, issues of African nature, so that the young people would understand and ask questions, and he would provide answers. Mbiti would go to other churches. Mbiti would go and air out his views on televisions over different. So he had several lectures, he had several moments when he engaged with the public. He's recorded as one who you cannot tell when he actually sat in an office, because some of the records do highlight a full page of what he did in a particular semester, in a particular season. So Mbiti gives us an example of what is it that we believe, what is that we hold dear, that we can take out for the public to engage with. And I think Tuhirirwe and some of us are letting Mbiti down. I think we sit a lot on some of the things that we see, some of the things that we see young people grapple with, and we have not come out to clearly say, this should be the way to go. If Mbiti was in this conference this week, what are some of the things he would have underlined? So I think we need to redeem ourselves and give attention to some of the things that would have been dear to him, but also get out of our comfort zones and write and provide answers to some of the issues that affect society. As part of Mbiti's legacy, we want also to clearly say that there is continuity and discontinuity of some of the things, because when you see churches or independent churches, there is that continuity of ATR can also be seen in there, but also discontinuity. For example, today, you might have noticed that there are people who actually change their names, especially the surnames, because of context. So if you look at the African charismatic Christianity today, if you have a name that may not have a particular either blessing, if it connotes something negative, you'll find that the current Pentecostal wave, and even as far as the early times in the 70s, you'd see that you're being told your name is carrying something along with you which is not good. So I'm aware of several people who have changed their names from Nalusiba to Namukisa, Komakech to Komagum, because of what those names seem to mean. We also see that in Mbiti's own thoughts, his philosophy, it is, I think the COVID lockdown, for example, brings out a challenge to some of Mbiti's assertions and philosophy. For example, when he says, I am because we are, which has been quoted by so many people. I am because we are, and since we are, therefore I am. I saw that being challenged during the COVID lockdowns. And we can take a moment and reflect how much of that survived. Of course, we went digital to stay together. We went online to stay together. But what was Mbiti underlining there? And I think that it is, whether we are hidden, whether we are under a rock, we will always look out for a moment where we feel together. And that's why the COVID lockdown challenged our settings, the African way of greeting. It was very complicated not to hug. There are many people who wanted to hug, but they could not, because we only greet when we have hugged. There are many people who could not up to now understand that they did not bury their loved ones. They did not perform rituals. And Mbiti, in highlighting the Africanicity, the African nature of the African people and how that connects with the thought of we did not. Today, very few religious scholars will write and leave out Mbiti. So I'd like to think that what is left for us right now is to just remember that Mbiti would love to see us reflect on the indigenous religious, research methods, for example. Mbiti would have loved to see us reflect more on what is valuable unto us, for example, the songs, the conversation, the folk tales, the stories that make meaning to us, and how those can be utilized in research, so that we do not go to the scholarship table with empty hands, and indeed we cannot, because all the things that come to us in written text, somehow we can take the conversation along with us. So on the scholarship table, we cannot go empty-handed. We have a lot with us, and this will create continuity, and the indigenous knowledge system can be developed, even tracing back from Mbiti. And so his legacy lives on, and I would like to stop there in the interest of time, because the timekeeper has been strict. Thank you.
With John Mbiti, and then we will have all our engagements with both papers at the same time. Yes, I'm privileged, I should say, to be from the Department of Literature, and then to welcome my chair of department, Dr. Edgar Nabutanyi, to take us through a paper that is entitled, They Did and Told. Who are they? The Convergence of Craft and Pedagogy in the Work of Makerere Writers and Scholars. Welcome, Dr. Edgar Nabutanyi.
Thank you, Ian. And probably a small correction, this is a joint paper. I'm presenting it with Mr. Isaac Tibasiima, and I will use 10 minutes, and Mr. Tibasiima, I urge him also to use 10 minutes so that we don't fall foul of the tough timekeeper. Our paper is informed, play by the English-American playwright George Bernard Shaw, entitled Man and Superman. And one character in this play, makes this statement that those who can do, those who can't teach. And essentially, this is a derogatory statement against, literary critics. And so the literal interpretation of that statement is that writers are those people who have studied literature, who have the art and the ability to write. And those who study literature but don't have the skill to write are the ones then who go into literary criticism. And so our engagement in this paper is to dispel, that division between literary students who can write and those who cannot write and therefore can only write literary criticism. And we make this intervention as part of celebrating 100 years of Makerere University and the Department of Literature and its contribution to first the Ugandan Republic of Letters, but also to the entire world literatures. And our argument is simple, is that over the generations, the Department of Literature has produced a special cohort of writers. We structure our response in terms of generations, and I will ask you to indulge me to read one paragraph of how we conceptualize this. In his remarks during the Makerere at 100 homecoming dinner dubbed Through These Gates, the Vice Chancellor of the University, Professor Barnabas Wanangwe, delineated the 10 decades that constituted 100 years of Makerere's being since 1922. Besides elaborating on the decades that Makerere University has lived through, he also highlighted the momentous occasions that symbolize each decade. It is undisputed fact that Makerere University, as it celebrates its first century of existence, has nurtured 10 generations of men and women who have had a profound impact on the region and different industries and professionals. It is therefore unsurprising to claim that among those 10 generations, there have been a significant Department of Literature alumni who have contributed meaningfully to literary creativity and the teaching of literature in the region. Building on Nawangwe's generational temporality, this paper evokes the generational, spatial, and temporal tropes in classifying regional literature as eloquently postulated by Pius Adesami and Chris Dutton to argue that the literature department of Makerere can vouch for 3 generations of writers who have done both the creative work of producing literary text, but have also engaged in pedagogical work of teaching not only their own texts, but also those produced elsewhere. Furthermore, we argue that uncannily, the 3 generations of Makerere writer teachers neatly fall into the 3 most popular genres of prose fiction, poetry, oral literature, and film. So we are borrowing from Professor Nawangwe's idea of generations of great men and women of Makerere and placing it within the literary tradition of critical interpretation, especially of regional literatures such as African literature, West African literature, or Caribbean literature, which argues that there are moments which are related to particular generation. And therefore, our intervention is to posit that there has been 3 major generations of the Makerere Literature Department produced writers stroke critics. And these generations are the first generation where we consider the work of Ngugi wa Thiong'o and Timothy Wangusa. The second generation where we consider the work of Mary Karoro Kurut and Professor Dominica Dipio. And the third generation, the most contemporary generation, where we consider the work of Susan Chiguli and Evelyn Cindy Magara. And we are arguing on 3 principles. The first principle, we look at the creative works that they have produced. And we read for the recurrent themes and issues that their work deal with. Those of you who were in this hall during the opening keynote, you noted how passionately the members of the literature department justified the prominence of Ngugi as not only a writer, but also as a thinker and a theorist of African literature and African politics. So our exploration of Ngugi and Wangusa is to look at what they have produced, is to look at what they have written in the critical sense, and to look at their pedagogical practices. For example, with Ngugi, we noted Aulmaro when I want and decolonizing the mind as momentous moments in his career, which carry over from the 1968 memo abolishing the English department at the University of Nairobi. With Wangusa, we are looking at his works, but also his inaugural lecture as a turning point in his work, especially in the prominence of language, not only in creative work, but also in literary analysis. Mary Karoro Kurut, most of us know her as a public servant, having retired recently as a minister of State of General Duties in the office of the Prime Minister. What we excavate in this paper is her contributions to the literature department, where most remarkably, and a few others in the department went up to establish the Department of Establishing FemRight, which is exhibiting behind here, and what FemRight has done, the revolutionary impact of FemRight on Ugandan Republic of Letters. This idea of giving voice to women to tell their own stories is so fundamental in the teaching of literature, but also in the creation of literature. And therefore, it is arguable that Mary Karoro Kurut, in a single action of setting up a literary collective, changed the dynamics and the face not only of Ugandan literature, but of world literature. I will stop there and ask ITK to come and talk, being the younger man that he is, to talk about his contemporaries, Professor Dipio, Dr. Susan Chiguli, and Dr. Evelyn Cindy Magara. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Edgar. I'm not sure about contemporaries. Susan and Dipio have been my doctoral advisors. I bet that's why my chair asked me to do this with these two. But one of the things that we notice about, and we've said this, that like Ngugi says that Makerere made him, and we say that he made Makerere. When we think about practice and what we've studied, we look at, and for example, he's talked about Mary Karoro Kurut and her literary activism. When we get to Dominica Dipio, she's of course someone who has been dressed in different layers of personality and as a professor of literature. So when we look at Dipio, we are also thinking of her with all these different layers of personality, and how this identity, of course, has made her the person that she has turned out to be. We look at her work as work that, of course, like Mary Karoro Kurut, is able to bring gender issues and aspects of feminism to the fore in thinking through cinema in Africa. And one of my colleagues who was my classmate at BA, Cindy Magara. I always confuse her with my other colleague. Evelyn Cindy Magara and Room, and as far as I know, they teach the same courses in the department. One of the other things, of course, about Dipio is her interest in folklore, her interest in oral literatures, in film studies, and in literary theory. And because of this, of course, we are aware as a department that she's been involved a lot in bringing projects into the department, projects that deal with oral literature. and one of these was the Mark Nufu project in 2007, of which I was a beneficiary, and Cindy too was a beneficiary, and that project, of course, has also been part of my doctoral work in this university. Sisters, of course, with colleagues, been able to edit a book, no, 3 books on oral literature. But also she has books in cinema, and she's also had to work a lot in the fields of, rather in the field of literary theory. One of the most interesting things about her is thinking about women in the public space and bringing women who are considered peripheral subjects to the center and decentering patriarchy, and talking about this in her film, thinking this brought very many questions into the public sphere about things that we sometimes never really think about, and yet they're common and daily experiences that we definitely need to think through as we go on in our lives. So in thinking about Dipio, we are talking about her as a person who has been able to talk about women. And like Mary Karoro Krut, who was her senior, talking about literature as activist, and also bringing in the centering of humanity at the study and at the center of literary study. And of course, in thinking about post-coloniality and how we need to think about post-coloniality within the spaces of gender studies and literary studies. My other advisor, who this paper, of course, is part of, is Dr. Associate Professor Susan Chiguli, who is a performance poet, who is also considered Uganda's contemporary poet. We are aware that she was the first to write an anthology in Uganda and win an award for that anthology. That was the African Saga, which deals with the crisis of Africa in the 90s. Susan, of course, is a performance poet and also is interested in poetry. In one of, and this is something our students have said, considered to be one of the most passionate of teachers in the department. I see Anna is Anna is clapping her hand. Yeah, our students believe Susan is one of the most passionate of teachers. And I think one student told us how Susan teaches and you get ashamed that you don't understand what she's saying. But she teaches everything that she's saying with a lot of passion, and it's easy to connect with her in that regard. But of course, Susan has also been interested in oral literature, especially oral literatures of the Baganda, and thinking about public spaces as spaces where lots of things are negotiated, gender and power and issues of nationalism, and of course, which she's been able to supervise me for my PhD, but also thinking about how all these, and making literature a commonplace thing, not something that needs to be looked at as a hard field of study in the humanities. I'd like to go to my contemporary, with whom I went to school for my BA, that's Cindy. Cindy is a filmmaker, and this is when I don't like to present papers with people I'm talking about here. And she's Cindy, someone is saying you stand up. I don't know what they want you for. She's ashamed. No, she's shy, not ashamed. This English of ours. So Cindy studied film and has interestingly gone on to deal with the film genre in literary studies. I must say that we teach film in the Department of Literature, and this was introduced by Sister when I was in my 3rd year here. That was 2004, 2005, and Cindy was one of her students. Cindy has gone on to work on films and produced documentaries, and not just films, but award-winning films. And this shows how much, while people imagine that what we do in the academy is not connected to practice, these two, Cindy and Dipio, have been able to show that what actually happens in the lecture room is something that we can put out in the fore. Her debut movie, which was Fate, was followed by a substantial oeuvre that includes Jiram, which is 2006, Fair Play 2010, Window of Hope 2011, A Book for Every Child 2012, and Breaking the Mesh 2012. Her collection of fields attests to the fact that she is a prolific filmmaker, and I mean that when I say it, Cindy. She has argued elsewhere that film is an important tool of emancipating marginalized people, This philosophy that saturates, this is the philosophy that saturates her films. For example, the central theme of her debut film, Fate, reoccurs in all her other productions. This is the idea that women are at the mercy of patriarchal institutions, and film is a powerful tool of breaking this enslavement. In thinking about each one of these things, and like we've said, literature is not supposed to be looked at as something that ends in the classroom. These colleagues of ours that we've talked about deals with. And also, we want to say that one of the most amazing things is how, like my colleague said, each one of them, whether it is the novel, or it is poetry, or it is drama, each one of these genres of literature are things that then we are able, and I'll say this with all pride, we are able as a department to bring to the fore to our students, especially for those who do creative writing. And I want to say that each one of these things are things that then we try our level best to encourage our students to engage in, whether it's film and the production of film, whether it is creative writing and writing in different arenas that they are able to write in, but also to show that just because we study literature does not mean we cannot practice this literature. And thinking about theory, thinking about the practice of theory, thinking about even the very genres that we teach is at the center of how we are thinking about this history of the literature department, and thinking through ours as a production of knowledge from within the university, and not having to always imagine that we have to consume knowledge from elsewhere. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Isaac Tibasiima. He's whispering to me. You know, he brought home to us the idea that literature is practice, and we have now heard about literature in the marketplace and literature in society, because we always think, and when I was a student, I was taught that you want to talk about the works of people when they are dead. But now I can see Dr. Sin Magara. Could you wave? You can stand. She's shy. Okay, that's Dr. Sin Magara, the filmmaker, and of 5 films in about 4 years. That's very prolific. Yeah, so that's really remarkable. And so we are in the marketplace. We are doing lots of things to connect with the Ugandan society. So therefore, it's not justified to say that the humanities and literature are aloof of what goes on in society and that we are irrelevant to development. That's not valid. All right, so we're going to open up our session to discussion, and I have a hand ready. Okay, so we yes, please. I think we're going to take a first round of questions, and then a response. They will respond, and then we take a second round, and they will respond. But I think I'm going to be selfish a bit. Please don't forgive me. To just begin the first question and ask Dr. Christine Mpyangu to just, because I was wondering, Dr. Christine Mpyangu, how does the department, the scholarship in your department, engage with John Mbiti's philosophy of African identity that is embedded in that statement, relate with it in literature as one of the fundamental ideas in communitarianism? Yes, gentlemen, I think we need a mic. Okay, the mic is ready with Professor Derek. So please, Professor Patterson, you can talk to us. And now she's going to be determining who is next, because you see she has the power. She has the mic. Okay, so over to you, Professor Derek.
Okay, thank you. So this is a fascinating panel because it puts together 2 departments, both of which were born out of the anti-colonial or anti-racist effort to define African cultural property. So African literature as a canon follows on from the 1950s and Achebe's effort to challenge colonialist representations of Africa. Things Fall Apart opens up the curriculum and in turn gives rise to the Heinemann African Writers series, from which much of the work of the panel is this. It has the time for culturalism in the curriculum passed? That is it still necessary for religion departments to teach African traditional religion as though it were a singular thing as part of this effort to push singular Euro It's still not literature is the other kinds of literature. In other words, what are the limits of the area studies frame in which both of your disciplines were defined by their founding father in 2022, and it may be perhaps time to kind of work with different criteria? So that's my question.
Yes, go on, please.
Thank you. My name is Dre, and sometimes I play around with the pen, and I hope to get there. I'll get there with time. Cindy cast me in my first movie role ever 100 years ago, after I'd gone for 1,000 auditions, and I'm forever indebted to her. My question goes to Isaac. In his presentation, he said, well, his colleague before him, just before him, said there have been 3 generations of writers. Ngugi wa Thiong'o, the earlier ones, and then he went on and on and on. And I'm thinking, shouldn't we start conversation of a 4th generation? Because we have a certain Monica Arach, the Jambula Tree, Lamwaka Beatrice, more recently Harriet Anena, she won the Wole Soyinka Prize. And then the radical poet performance, Ngobi Kagai, with this protest poetry. Shouldn't we have a 4th generation of writers about time? I'm thinking. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that presentation. My question first goes to Dr. Christine. Can you critique Mbiti for his epistemological deployment of a term like religion to understand the different practices in the pre-modern or pre-colonial times, given the fact that the term religion ideally rises from 1492 in Europe with the conquest of Grenada by Spain? Then the second question is, why have we not decolonized religion as yet, despite his philosophy? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think we'll have one more question, and then we'll have the responses.
Okay.
We have 2, 3 more. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you very much to everyone on the panel. My name is Waswa Kisule, historian of Buganda and also aspiring novelist. The novel I'm trying to write now focuses on war in Buganda, and I take as my influences Homer, the Greek poet, and Lucan of Rome. My question is why in a lot of the literature that has come out of Makerere and Africa generally, war is not as prominent a theme as it literature. Secondly, I would like to know where you place Dr. Jennifer Nansubugamakumbi, who it has been said of her novel Chintu that it is the great Ugandan novel. Thank you.
Should I go ahead?
Yes, we had, yes. And
okay. Mine is following up on the concern about the categorization that Dr. Nabutanyi has made about the generations. Because I'm looking at Karoro Kurut and Chiguli, and Karoro Kurut creating FemRight, and Susan Chiguli being part of FemRight, Mother Hen, and all those women who write within FemRight. Is that categorization, is it possible to categorize them as one generation of writers? And then the other question about this categorization also goes with the scope. I'm looking at other writers that are outside, who have written outside the literature department, but perhaps have also been part of the literature department. You don't mention Danson Kayana, you don't mention Stella Nyanzi, and the more current writers like the Dinyeko that he has mentioned. Those to me would be perhaps the 3rd generation. But the middle generation, where Mother Hen nurtures them into FemRight, would be the 2nd generation for me. So my question is, how is this categorization problematic?
Okay, thank you so much, Chair. and thank you so much to the presenters. My question goes to Dr. Mpyangu and Tuhirirwe. It was very interesting to listen to you talk about Mbiti and his legacy. And I'll pick up on the statement that Dr. Mpyangu said, that Mbiti would like to see us develop more indigenous research methods. It will be little had I known you, not been here, but it's good to actually, makes me feel like a little Wangusa. We recently celebrated Wangusa here. So maybe to you and to them, is there a way of decolonizing theory as we look at the corpus of African studies in various disciplines? One, religious studies and literature, it's good to look at us, the critics and the creatives, what we make, how about how much of theory is coming from us, from Africans. When I was doing my PhD, I struggled with my supervisor to tell her I don't want to use any of those old
display. So I asked him, I said, Sam, how can I get my books on the market? That was one question. The second question was, and it's relevant here. I said, Sam, the humanities are under siege. What do we do? And he said, oh, do you know there is a conference in Makerere right now which is on humanities. I told my driver to drive straight here, and I went down to Maiza. They said, no, the conference is on the main campus. And so I ended up here. My names are Semakula Kiwanuka, and I have been wishing to come and meet the ladies and gentlemen who are in charge of the humanities and social sciences, because the recent attack is not the first, if you have been following it. And my question was, and probably this is not the best forum, is how do we respond? How do we show that humanities and social sciences are relevant? I'm not asking you for an answer now, because this is not the forum for it. And I'm happy to see you people who are here, because you are being paid as social scientists and humanities to show your relevance. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And please, as you see it, please be with us tomorrow. We have a panel in this very location where we're going to have insight from practitioners. We have invited people like you, and and people in the marketplace who have also have a hand in the academia, but also 2 feet also in practice, to just discuss, because sometimes we remain in these buildings and we're locked up in our own caucuses. So now over to our panelists. They are going to engage with the questions. Now, since each paper has 2 people, they will discuss who is going to answer what. So we'll begin with the panel I don't want to call them couple, because you see now people have this genderistic kind of, when I say couple, they're going to say, Anyway, but they're a pair. They are a pair that are talking about joining Mbiti. So over to you, Christine and Chris.
Thank you very much for this session. Let me begin with the Ubuntu, the Mbiti's philosophy of I am because you are and since I am, therefore, since you are, therefore I am, and how we are engaging with that in our own department. Because we live together almost on a daily, as we do our work, as we go around our interactions, we live together. We talk through things. We care about what's going on with our colleagues. So that's on a human-to-human interaction on a daily basis. But on the scholarship side, we are looking out for one another in terms of work, in terms of teaching. So we teach together and share issues that are emerging from our learners, the comments that they may give. In one of the, in the chapter that we wrote, we co-authored this with Dr. Tuhirirwe again, in the book that came out. While carrying out that research, I asked a question to the students, current and former, during the time of investigating, and obtaining data. I asked the students what was their most cherished course unit, and why. That was a voice I was looking out to know, so that I can provide feedback in terms of actual teaching, so that I can use that response in reviewing some of the courses that we are doing, so that I could also provide some pertinent answers, maybe to individuals, according to the answers from the students. So some of the former students were very passionate about certain courses, but one of the courses that they were passionate about was actually ATR, one of the course units. So I came to Chris and I told him that this course, the students are saying, it makes them reflect further about their own cultures, heritage, and some of the things that they daily take for granted. So in a way, I felt that that bit of work created an opportunity for us to get real-time responses on the things we teach, on the content, and on the things we engage with. So in that department, there are groups of researchers. People work together in teams, and you'll find that a particular project is having 1, 2, 3, 4 colleagues that are working together on it. And we are trying our level best to challenge ourselves to be strong, to rise and write and respond to issues. So in that sense, we are responding to that philosophy. I don't know whether I should first allow Dr. Chris to add on that or want to answer, and then I'll pick it up from there.
I think on the issue of the philosophy of Mbiti, which was clearly summarized in his statement, very powerful statement, I am because we are, and because we are, therefore I am. That was a very powerful philosophy of Mbiti. In the department, we really tried, but also to live it practically, as she has mentioned. How can we be concerned about what is happening to the other? Because you see, when you dig deep into what Mbiti really wanted, or what he meant, was that we must be concerned about the other, as others are also concerned about us. You are as an individual because others are, and the others are also there because you are. So we need each other, and that's very important, and we try to live it in the department. We try to respond to it. We teach it seriously in our course, and also we emphasize it. I think maybe, Christine, let me also respond to the second question that was about is it still necessary for the Department of Religion and Peace Studies to teach ATR. Yes. As you have just heard, actually, majority of the students, when we carry out a survey, they like it. They enjoy studying about African tradition. It's not actually one of the core courses that are emphasized in secondary schools today, although it's also taught, but in the department we consider it as a core. And interestingly, majority of the students take it, like it, and because it's to do with our life, our community, our life, the beliefs, our philosophers, Africans, our religious belief systems and practices, we live it daily. You see, when Mbiti is arguing, he says, as an African, you live your religion every day. If you are a politician, you go with it in parliament. If you are a farmer, you go with it in the field and everywhere. So we live. To him, actually, to live is to be religious. And so we practice and we live African religion daily. It's very important really to know about it and to even ensure that it is emphasized and taught even stronger than it is being taught today.
Thank you, Chris. And to add on that, I do not know why we would consider abandoning teaching ATR, because right now there are so many things that are happening in the world, so to speak. This whole global village issue, it's very possible to diminish that which actually defines you. I know that many elites would at some point consider where they work, how they live their daily lives, and with a lot of influence from formal education, we are crossing borders. So if you go to study in Taiwan, in Japan, what is that you'll hold on to, which is of a religious nature, but also of your identity as an African? And I think highlighting these things in a classroom environment, encouraging research on such, on content that is of an African nature from a religious perspective is so important, because it is critical for students to know themselves so that they can know the other, to appreciate themselves so that they can appreciate the other. So if we leave teaching ATR, we will have not helped altogether lift that which is of African identity. And for some reason, technology, all the forces that are coming with globalization are pursuing the African identity. And so you'll find people dressing differently, there are different things they want to believe in. But at some moment in time, that which is dear to them, it comes back into play. So I would think that it's critically important to stick, but modify, improve, investigate, interrogate some of the beliefs we have held dear. My research field is Northern Uganda, Acholi sub-region. I have witnessed the performance of rituals alongside the reciting of the rosary. So it was not difficult for me during some of my fields. The same group that has just been praying have actually crossed on the other side to perform the traditional rituals. It may look like a double religious heritage. It could even be mistaken for, syncretism or something of that nature. But in a way, someone is saying, look, for us, this is what we do in case of this situation. So I think we shouldn't divorce ourselves from that which needs to be highlighted. There are many students that are born from different cultural heritages, like the intercultural marriages. So again, those need to be helped, sometimes even to appreciate language. There are families where English is the language being used because the mother speaks a different language from the father. And this is very important. Thank you. I told you I was strict.
Yes, I think let's have the pair from literature respond to the questions. They have many questions. I don't know.
Okay, I will choose the simple ones and leave the tough ones for ITK. After all, if it is the food, we leave the larger portion to the child because they are growing up. For the gentleman who has read the Iliad, that is good and impressive. The Iliad and the Odyssey is for the Greek what the Aeneid is for the Romans, and these are foundational ideological texts, justifying the exceptionalism of a race or a group of people. And in this case, war or the martial prowess of the Greeks and the Romans is what justifies them as exceptional, and therefore justifies their conquest of the Mediterranean world. What would be the equivalent of that in African societies? Our myth of creation. For the Muganda, the myth of Chintu is equivalent to the Iliad. Chintu, who performs the Herculean task of going to Guru's palace and identifying his cow among the many cows, is literally the Odyssean, the Odysseus of the Greek quintessential hero. Which then leads to your next question, which was, why is there little writing about war in Ugandan literature? Maybe my answer to this is to reference the Ghanaian novelist and literary critic Amadako, who argues that when there is a crisis in a nation, its writers will write. And therefore, they will write about the crises. Uganda's crises, and there are many of them, and many Ugandan writers have written about them, both old and young, have not really been about war. They have been about the colonial creation called Uganda. Yes, we have had a few wars. Professor Peterson was talking about the secessionist impulse in certain groups of Ugandans. That is a fact. But as opposed, for example, to Kenya and the Mau Mau, the theme of war has really not been prominent because our writers are concerned with issues that affect us as a society. Chintu definitely when we talk of the Ugandan literary canon, you talk about Okoti Bapiteki's Song of Lawino, Moses Segawa's Abyssinian Chronicles, and Jennifer Makumbi's Chintu. They are the foundational texts of the Ugandan literary canon. And maybe by referencing back to my previous answer, what is the thread that joins Okoti Pabiteki's Song of Lawino, Moses Segawa's Abyssinian Chronicles, and Chintu are quintessential Ugandan issues, which largely come from the disagreement or the failure to have an agreement on what is minimum Uganda. What is the other simple one I can? Do we teach African literature, or is it still relevant to teach African literature at this moment? The answer to that is that actually we stopped teaching a regional literature way back in 1966 with Ngugi, Tabani Lilyong, and Peter Nyumba Owori, petitioning the English department at the University of Nairobi and advocating for what has been, what is now known as literature in English. Any student who qualifies from Makerere, for example, or the University of Nairobi will have had an eclectic menu that stretches from the pastoral of Walter Whitman to the sentimentalism of Tolstoy's War and Peace, and the pragmatism of the French in a novel like Madame Bovary, to the decolonial questions of Chinua Achebe and Ngugi wa Thiong'o, to the contemporary activism of Adichie and Arach. I think this is really a problem of our colleagues in the North America and in Europe, and IETIC here has taught or consulted on Ugandan literature from up north. From what the Troika, the Nairobi threesome, I've introduced a new word which shouldn't come here. The Ngugi and company, introduced world literature in the syllabus, and it is something that, across the region we have taken up. I take it, about the generations and how we framed these generations, it is work in progress, and Dr. Bila, we take this in advisement, but our, thesis is that there is this artificial division between Ugandan, Makerere trained writers who write and those who teach. And our presentation and our paper is about those who do both. And so as much as Nansubuga, Beatrice Lamwaka are Afro-Ugandan writers, we excluded them because of our framework, our parameters. That doesn't exclude them from the Ugandan literary canon. For others like Stella Nyanzi, Danson Kayana, James Ochita, they would literally follow here, but our thinking, which can be refined, we shall think more about it, is we are using public record of their contribution. And we seem to have more, for example, on Cindy Magara's film and teaching, and we tend to have more on Danson Kayana's teaching than on his creative work or its reception. But we do mention this. Of course, the most glaring omission in our categorization is David Rubadiri. He has to be there. We wanted to put him there. But we tend to get a sense that he's more seen as a diplomat, more seen as an administrator, and maybe if we have included Mary Karoro Kurut, we should include Rubadili, but that is something that is evolving.
Thank you. Wanje? Is there a way we can decolonize the teaching of literature? I'm very careful with the word decolonizing lately. And I think because I'm into a lot of post-colonial studies and how we think about decoloniality, I sometimes tend to agree with a colleague who says there is a need to decolonize the way we think about decolonizing. Because decoloniality seemingly is, I think, to her, a Eurocentric notion that needs to be rethought from the periphery, from Africa, which is, of course, considered the periphery. I'm again careful when I use that word in this talk. What I want to say, though, is theory and the way we teach theory, and this I'm saying because this is what I do. The way we teach theory, I know at undergraduate, is a lot from Europe, and then we come down to Africa. But I'm also aware that the way we are doing research in the Department of Literature is the kind that really centers African theory to the debates. And Cindy was saying, say for example, oral literature, we are much aware that oral literature theory is something that we center a lot on Austin Bukenya and Pio Zirimu here in the department. Even if you read, one of the things I struggled with when I was doing my doctoral work was always being reminded that I was writing from an African university and not from a Western university. And so I had to get back to Ngugi, I had to get back to Fanon, I had to get back to the people. And then my supervisor said, Isaac, why are you not referencing us? Are we not writing? But that also makes you aware of how sometimes maybe we don't think a lot about writing here, and we want to think about writing there. That's why I have a problem with our colleague there who believes Homer is the standard. Homer is not the standard. and if you read her work, but also if you read the griot tradition, I know someone who, in oral literature, for us who are into oral literature, who said there is no such thing as epic in Africa. And in 2012, over 30 years after writing that book, she said, I still stand by my conviction. There is no epic in Africa. Even after Okpeho had said there is epic, even after all people in folklore studies had said there's epic in Africa, Ruth Finnegan still said there is no epic in Africa. And so one person said the famous thing, Virginia, there is an epic in Africa, of course, which was an insulting expression that person made. Well, about decolonizing theory, I think we also want to think about decolonizing ourselves and decolonizing knowledge and thinking about production from the South, knowledge production from the South, but also how we consume this knowledge and whether we place Western knowledge above African knowledge. And you know, when writers have come up to contest Western knowledge, one of the things many times we've always said is, no, the other is superior. I remember Oyewumi saying there is no gender in Africa, and people wanted to eat her up. And she said, no, gender is not an African concept. And that book has been one of the most interesting to read in gender studies from an African woman. Dre, you talked about generational poets. And like Edgar said, we are thinking about people who have studied here and have taught here. So it's a craft that they've put in practice while here. However, I'm much aware, and we're writing a paper with Sister Dipio on the issue of new forms of performance in Uganda. And we're thinking especially about what we are calling spoken word poetry, which might not be actually as new as we assume it is. Because when we think about, say, I don't know if you're aware of these traditions, if you came to Western Uganda, there's what they call the Echevugo tradition. Among my people, there's what they call the Ekihaiso tradition. When you go down to Rwanda, there's what they call Ukwivuga. And then when you go down to South Africa, there's Izibongo and Lithoko poetry. And you'll notice that when you think about the connections between spoken word poetry and these African forms of poetry, there might actually be a connection. And one of the things we're working on is how poetry and the way it is now performed has become a space for activism, a space for saying, hey, we are here, we need to be listened to. And so while we want to sometimes assume that these are new forms of poetry, we might actually probably want to rethink how we think about these forms of poetry. And I know that Sister and I are working on that, but I'm also working on something especially on this thing we have in Makerere, the Kelele poetry, and thinking about that as a very interesting genre for the young, but also how we can think about that poetry and what it does for the audiences. So we acknowledge that, but we also acknowledge in our paper, and we are specific to say it is people who have studied here and who are teaching here and are practicing what they have studied. How do you respond to the relevance of humanities and social sciences? And I think this is a question, I hate to say this. I had someone on Tuesday say this, but I remember when I was doing literary theory, we had this essay, The Defense of Poetry. I think we need to stop defending ourselves. I hate to say this. I think we need to stop defending ourselves. And you know why? Japan is a beautifully science country. Japan has some of the highest rates of some of the strangest things. Some of the strangest things. And people are lonely. You know, I have always told people, if you want to take away the sciences, it's rather the arts, it is okay. By the way, it is perfectly fine. But don't come running to us when people want to talk to someone and it's machines before them. That one I have no problem with. And I think, in all honesty, whether we keep our relevance or not is not the issue. I think the issue is that we do what we have to do and we do it the best way we can do it. That is my thinking, and I know some people think, I think recently I told the principal we've really become activists in this science arts thing. But the truth is, let's do what we do the best we can. Because people may never appreciate what we do, and that is perfectly okay. I have no problem. I'll tell you a little story. When I was doing my MA, one of the books we had was Animal Farm. And so my sister, who is an engineer, saw the book. It has cartoons. I still remember this question. She said, Isaac, how can you be reading a children's book at MA? And I remember telling her, if you don't understand what I'm reading, simply shut up. Yes. And I remember when I was teaching at high school, I was teaching Sons and Lovers, and then this one teacher passed by and said, and got me in the staff room and said, why are you teaching children about sex? And I told him, you know, I'm going to give you a piece of advice. Stick to your art. I will stick to my literature. Because people sometimes don't understand the things we do, and that is okay. So let's do what we do the best way we can do it. Let's stop. Actually, let me be honest. The more we defend ourselves and show these people that we are here, the more they'll actually smother us. So let's just let them be. It's okay. We will survive. We've survived, and we will always survive. I'm sorry I had to say that, but I said it. So I think those were the questions. Yes, I'm stopping. I think that's what I had to say. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do not have. Do you have more questions? You know, our panel was supposed to end at 10 minutes past 4 because we began at 10 minutes past 2. So, do we have some questions?
We still
coming from the audience. Okay, well, since there was one more, there are 2 questions. One is behind one. So that one will. Okay, they're growing. Yeah, those we can take those 3, and then they will respond to them all together with the rest of the responses. You know, some of the questions are wide and winding and winding and winding. Please ask your question.
Thank you very much, Chair. I would like to ask from you whether I'm allowed to ask someone who is seated this way, now that they presented about her and she decided to be around.
Well, according to the powers endowed on my chair, well, you're not supposed to ask through me, the person who is seated next to you. You're going to communicate to her in the corridors. So that's question answered. Number 2?
Okay, now I'll come direct, since you have run away from my question. When Dr. Christine was presenting at the start she said Dr. Chris stands in for Professor Mbiti, and he carries, hope I've said this the correct name, John Mbiti, and he carries on his legacy. That means in some way or another, he has been groomed by Mbiti. He may say yes or not. Then when they began to talk about my teacher, I know she's looking at me, but at least she can't cane me now. We were also informed that she went through the hands of Professor Dipio, who is also my teacher. I realized that she has also been mentored, groomed by Sister Dipio. That's why she has reached where she has and has achieved whatever she has because of her. My question is, Dr. Cindy, ECM, have you tried to mentor any person who is also going to carry your legacy?
No, you've really violated. How could you go winding up like that and end up there? And I've not allowed her to answer you here. She'll answer you in the corridor. Next question.
Thank you.
Yeah, now the panel will answer you. The panel will answer you. You don't have to, though she's alive as a writer, you don't talk to her directly like that.
Thank you very much, the panelists. I'm called Mutambi Samuel, and I'm a student of philosophy and a passionate lover of literature, especially oral literature. According to the presentation by Chris and Christine, I don't know how it came by coincidence for them to be Cree, but that's it. We see the legacy passed on to us from Mbiti. And by similarity, when you look to the legacy of Ngugi wa Thiong'o, they both share some similarities. They had a great contribution to the academics, but they did not lose the touch with the mainstream society. It means they developed knowledge hand in hand with the community in which they came from. Maybe they knew the society where they came from would be the same society who would consume their knowledge. Now the question comes, don't you think that the contemporary writers, in which you two also are included, are detached from the mainstream society? What can we do for sure to integrate the academic knowledge with the informal knowledge or the knowledge from the mainstream society so that we can have the consumers of knowledge and the producers of knowledge, in which I can term as the economics of knowledge, so that we don't produce and store in the shelves, and when we go to the society, we don't see the reflection of the knowledge we produce. Finally.
Make your question short, because now I thought you had finished.
Okay, think I can start from here.
Okay, thank you very much. Mine is to Ian and ITK. Talking about those who can do, and then those who can teach. I would think we should have started probably with our own Okot PB Tech being probably the groundbreaking of both. And even I think the whole debate of decolonization begins with him, though it's popular with Ngugi. So I think he shouldn't be missing on the list unless otherwise.
Thank you very much. Now, so over to the Mbiti panel. I mean, Mbiti, yes. Okay, that panel. Yes, and then, yes, please. Sorry, we have extended a bit because you were asking questions and they were long ones. But I think this being the last panel we had, we took the liberty of taking a few more minutes of your evening, but we're not going to take any more questions. So after these responses, we will now wait for tomorrow's panel, please, which begins at 9.
Okay. I think the question that went to Dr. Cindy could apply to any of us, because it is important that we groom and mentor. And it's a beautiful thing when you look back and you can tell that I have a few people that I'm depositing a little bit of what I do and know, and you know for sure that soon or later it will grow and evolve in your very own eyes. So that's a good thing. But concerning the economics of knowledge and how Mbiti, Ngugi did what they did and how whatever they did was consumed, going, for example, to what we do. I think there can be a very big issue between what we are doing, how it's captured and documented, and how the rest get to sort of consume it. So there could be a weakness in that process. But what I'd like to highlight, colleagues in the discipline of religious studies are quite out there, impacting society variously. We have programs that take us to train and meet with the police. We have programs that take us to local leaders, and we partner with local government. So you'll find us in Mayuge, and maybe Dr. Chris will actually highlight more on that. But let me skip and go to where I spend some of the time and how the knowledge is playing out there. Because I'm interested in women and war, and especially in conflict and post-conflict scenarios, I have time. I take off time to go to northern Uganda, and it's been very rewarding to see that some of the articles I've authored are picked by colleagues and scholars in Japan, in the US, in Israel, and we are translating what we have written about into real livelihood and life-transforming actions in the communities. So most recently, I was in Kitgum in the beginning of the year in January, spent 15 days there. In May, June, I was again there, and I've met about 620 women in Kitgum and in just one sub-county, together with the local leaders, and we are discussing issues of livelihoods. And we're able to marry the methods of narrative, telling stories, discussing how life can be made better despite the issues they have, despite the problems they have encountered during the war and after the war. So what we do, we meet formerly abducted girls, formerly abducted women now, with those who were never abducted, have conversations, and eventually transform these into livelihood-changing actions. So there's a lot going on. It's a question of locating where what we have done is deposited. But otherwise, we can be stronger, we can be more intentional about documenting and especially disseminating what we are doing. But there is for sure interaction between scholars and the community. We also have projects, for example, in districts where there are some, ethnic conflicts. And I wanted to say something about which theory we use, or how African is what we're doing. Which African theories do we use in what we do in our teaching, in our research? Personally, I'm passionate about ethnomethodology. When I go into a community, I'm interested in seeing what people do, how they do it and why they do it the way they do it. What time do they do what? So those enable me to have a thick description of the society and to be able to analyze and look through what might be needed and which can have an effect on positively on the lives of the people, how we can carry forward the good things that are within that community. Because when you see what people do, why they do it, how they do it, you are able to tell what is the potential outcome of what's being done. And so then you're able to see how to go forward with them and also maybe impact through oral conversations, you know, and reverse some of the things that may be done which may not necessarily be helpful in certain ways. So I think in that way, we know for sure that we are reaching out to the community. Yes, someone asked earlier why we have failed to decolonize religion. I don't know if she's still here, and I would like to add, you know, exactly what Isaac said. We need to be very careful. I'm that one person who doesn't want to rush with jargon and all these big words. So if you instead of decolonizing religion, what are we saying? So in the beginning, the community itself should define what religion is for them. That's what I think. Let people know what they believe, what they practice, what they cherish, what makes them say this is life for them. So if it were Mbiti, he would be interested in the rituals, he would be interested in the practices, in the ceremonies, in the festivals, and he would tell clearly when he expects what to happen. So he knows when there is a festival, people are dancing, singing, eating away. And there are different scholars who are interested in what religion is. So what do I mean if I say we should decolonize religion? So the community will be supported through engaging with them to know what is it that we need to decolonize within religion. Is it the belief or the belief systems? Is it the practice? And which particular practice? If you define it according to Mbiti, you're going to have a lot of things to streamline to be able to say that now we are on the road to decolonizing religion. So again, I say that's a huge responsibility, but I think with time, people are getting to a place where they understand what it is that they believe and why they believe. Our work, I think, is also to point and say this is too much or this is not helpful. And then again, they will tell you what is helpful. And we see these things play out on a daily, because religion is a lived reality, a daily lived reality. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My co-author, Christine. And yeah, so let me just summarize. I think I have about 2 questions here. One is asking, am I groomed by Mbiti or not? Am I carrying on his legacy in the department? Very interesting question. Actually, I joined the department, I joined in the late 80s, when actually Mbiti had already long left the department. And actually, we are happy today to have, I believe Professor Semakura Chiwanaka over there must have been at Makerere when Mbiti was there. I don't know whether I can call you contemporaries or whatever, but certainly we are discussing the legacy of a great man whom I think you must have interacted with when you were here in history department, because Mbiti was all around. But personally, I think I would say I have been mentored and groomed much more by Professor Byaruhanga Kiki, who is now Professor Emeritus, but who was also groomed by Mbiti, mentored by Mbiti. So that's why when she was starting, she joked and said, maybe I'm a grandson of Mbiti. Probably she's right. So it's important to carry on his legacy, especially in the area of research and publication. And that ties to what somebody was asking up there about contemporary knowledge and how it can go to the consumers. I think much of the engagement with the public is very important in the department. We need to really look to it, but also we need to look at especially how the department can engage with us, with the public, and we exchange knowledge, just like it was during Mbiti's time. I think that's probably something which is lacking Then this probably lastly ties up with what Christine asked at the beginning, that I should comment on whether I am stuck in Mbiti or whether I'm going beyond Mbiti. I think I am not stuck in Mbiti, although really I am a fan of Mbiti's works, but I think I go beyond Mbiti. I would like to see us uphold his legacy, especially in the area of publication in the African traditional religion. I think many of us are referring to his publications. Some of them were written in the early 1970s, and we are still referring to them. We are talking about Mbiti, Mbiti, Mbiti. But when can we now begin to refer to the works of Chris, to the works of Christine, those which address the contemporary aspects about Mbiti? Probably some of the things may have changed. Yes, these were great men and women during their time, but how can we produce other great men and women basing on this legacy of Mbiti? Decolonizing religion, I think the response concerning decolonizing literature can probably also directly answer the question about decolonizing religion. I think Mbiti if Mbiti was to be here today, he would be talking about decolonizing religion, and that's what actually he lived for. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Let's hear from the literature department.
There's no doubt that ECM has been mentored by DD and SK and many other, academics in the literature department. Your question goes to our conclusion. And our conclusion is that SK and DD and ECM are the future of the department. And as the future of the department, we are not sure what their trajectory of scholarship is going to be in 20 years, 30 years from now. But we are pretty sure that they have set their trajectory of their doing and teaching, Cindy on the activism, that potential of film as a medium. Yes, her trajectory might change. She might be interested in other things, but we are pretty sure that that is the line. And in that process, as she lives out her career in the next 20 years from now, she is definitely going to mentor some people. And when you talk to her, she will definitely tell you, because I know for sure that there are several people she has mentored in the area of film. And some of them might be familiar with you. And one is in this room. This goes back to our idea of generation. And maybe the best way to understand generation as a classificatory concept in literary studies is perhaps to go back to 1800 and read Johnson's essay, A Preface to Shakespeare. And essentially what Johnson says is that great literature or great contribution should make sense to a generation. And he measures his generation, which is copied by Heron Hibida in his forward to the Grant book of short stories. It has to make sense to a generation. And how does it make sense to a generation which is 30 years? That is why we disagreed with Professor Nawangwe of his delineation of a generation as 10 years. For us, we are thinking in 30 years. And of course, Okot Pabitek is canonical African writing, but we couldn't include him in our research. Actually, we exclude him deliberately because although he did have a creative writing fellowship in the department, he is a Cambridge-trained anthropologist. He's not a literary scholar. He is an anthropologist. And maybe this is, signpost for our next collaboration. Maybe we need to theorize the 3 generations of Ugandan writing without that disclaimer of someone having been a student, taught, and produced literature in the Department of Literature. This is, and I agree, it is kind of self-reflective, but we are in the 100th year of Makerere University. We are celebrating. And why not celebrate ourselves? We shall exclude Okot for now. We shall exclude Monica Arach for now and celebrate our own. And when the celebrations are over, when the hangover is over, we shall come back and do the good work that you want us to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, yes, Isaac doesn't seem to want to say anything, and he's tired, and I know. And you're tired. Thank you so very much for sitting through our panel. I hope it was interesting. I hope. Please, we begin at 9, at 8. Is it 8:30 tomorrow? Yes, we begin at 8:30 tomorrow, not 9. Today was 9, and we came 9:10. But now we begin at 8:30. That's earlier because we have more panels tomorrow, and they're very interesting. So please be here in the morning, and let's the dance begin. Before we leave, somebody left their phone at the serving center at lunchtime. Nobody has rang this phone. I would have picked it, but now nobody has rang the phone. So if you find someone crying in the corridors for their phone, I have it. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, thank you very much, panelists. Yeah, surely. A round of applause, please, as we stand up. Yes, now it's even a standing ovation. Okay.